My name is Lucille Hartman, and I never thought the worst kind of betrayal would come dressed as family. I raised my son with everything I had, so when he stood up at brunch and proudly said, "Glad you're loving the $6,000 I send monthly, Mom," I froze, because I hadn't seen a dime. What came next unraveled everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and silence. This is the story behind that moment. Stay with me. And if you've ever had to find your voice the hard way, tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You're not alone. It happened just as I reached for the cream. The brunch table was all laughter and clinking glasses, white linen glowing under the soft sun pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, magnolia trees bloomed in polite rows along the private patio. Inside, I was suffocating. I hadn't expected to be seated at the head of the table. I hadn't expected this brunch at all. "Glad you're loving the $6,000 a month, Mom." His voice rang out like a champagne cork popping. Everyone turned to look at me. I froze, fingers still wrapped around the porcelain handle of the cream jug. I smiled, thin, unsure, because that's what mothers do. But inside, my heart slammed against my ribs like a warning bell. 6,000? I felt the heat crawl up my neck. I hadn't seen my son, my only child, Daniel, in 4 months. He'd texted here and there, too busy with meetings, investors, flights. This brunch had come out of nowhere. A last-minute invite. "Bring your appetite, Mom," he'd said over the phone. "We're celebrating." I thought maybe he'd gotten engaged, or signed a new client. Or maybe, foolishly, I hoped he just wanted to see me. Instead, I was sitting across from his wife, Tiffany, who hadn't made eye contact since I arrived. She picked at her fruit salad like it had betrayed her. Her nails, perfect, almond-shaped, painted like glass, tapped against the side of her mimosa flute with surgical precision. And then Daniel, my Daniel, looked straight at me and said it again, louder this time. $6,000 a month, Mom. Come on. You have to admit, it's a pretty sweet setup." The whole table chuckled, a low, rehearsed sound. Even Tiffany's eyes flicked up briefly, like she was waiting for me to respond with gratitude. But my lips wouldn't move, because I hadn't seen a single cent. Let me take you back. 3 years ago, I was living in the same house I'd lived in since Daniel was 12. It wasn't much, but it held the echoes of his laughter in the hallway, the scrape of his cleats on the kitchen floor, the smell of pancake Saturdays. It held my late husband's memory in every creaking floorboard and every chipped windowsill he never got around to fixing. But after Arthur passed, things changed. Fast. Daniel was building his empire, real estate tech, venture capital. I barely understood half of it. He worked like a machine, called me less. But when he did, his voice would soften. "You don't have to work anymore, Mom," he said once. "Let me take care of you now." I laughed then. I told him I still had my bookkeeping clients, my hours at the local library. I wasn't some frail old woman, but I didn't tell him the truth. That Arthur's life insurance had barely covered the hospital bills, that I'd fallen 2 months behind on my mortgage, that I'd started selling homemade candles on Etsy just to keep the lights on. I didn't tell him that last winter I rationed heating oil, that some nights I wore 2 coats to bed. Why? Pride. Stubborn, aging pride. And maybe the hope that one day he'd notice without me having to say it. Now here I was, at a table covered in imported flowers and crystal water goblets, being told, no, announced to, that I was receiving $6,000 a month. And Tiffany? She didn't even flinch. That's when I knew. He thought he was sending it. Someone else. Made sure I never saw it. I put the cream down slowly, tried to steady my voice. "Daniel," I said gently, "what do you mean, $6,000 a month?" He laughed, flashing that perfect PR smile of his. "What do you mean? We've been sending it for 6 months now. Auto transfer, remember?" I shook my head, heart thundering. "There's nothing in my account," I said, watching his face closely. "I thought maybe you were busy. I didn't want to ask." Tiffany's fork scraped against her plate. The sound made me flinch. Daniel's brow creased. Wait, what? She looked up suddenly. Babe, didn't your assistant handle it? Yeah, but I set it up myself. I told you Chase routing, right? Ending in 027? I blinked. That was my old account, one I'd closed last year after too many overdraft fees. I closed that, I whispered. Daniel looked over at Tiffany. Silence. The air shifted. She coughed lightly. Maybe it bounced back? I don't check those statements, you know that. But her voice, silk and static, wasn't fooling anyone. Daniel stared at her. Long enough for me to wonder if he was finally hearing what I'd refused to say out loud for too long. That maybe his wife wasn't just forgetful, or distracted, or not into family stuff. Maybe she was deliberate. I excused myself to the restroom. But I didn't need to go. I just needed to breathe. Inside the marble-tiled powder room, I gripped the sink. My reflection looked too calm, too neat. Beige cardigan, soft lipstick, grandmotherly earrings. I looked like someone who'd never raise her voice, never make a scene. But inside, I was cracking. My son, the boy I raised with late-night soup and spelling bees and tearful teenage breakups, thought he was taking care of me. He thought I was comfortable, rested, cared for. And I'd been working 2 jobs just to avoid foreclosure. And someone had let him believe otherwise. No, not let. Made sure he did. I came back to the table smiling, sat down like nothing happened. Tiffany raised her glass. More OJ, Lucille? I nodded. My hands didn't shake, because something had shifted. Not in the room, but in me. I saw things more clearly now, and I wasn't about to let the woman who married my son write the story of who I was to him. Not anymore. There was a time I thought Tiffany was the best thing that had ever happened to Daniel. I remember the first night he brought her home. She arrived with a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce, a cashmere coat that draped over her like water, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but back then, I was too smitten to notice. She kissed me on the cheek like we'd known each other forever and said, "You must be the Lucille." I didn't know what that meant, but it felt like a compliment. Daniel hovered near her all night, his hand on the small of her back like a teenager desperate to keep the world from touching what he loved. He laughed at her jokes before she finished them, looked to her for approval before he answered mine. He was in awe of her. I was too. Not because she was warm, she wasn't. Not because she was kind, she wasn't that either. But because she seemed to fit a life he was building faster than I could keep up with. She spoke the language of ambition. She knew how to work a room, how to sip from a wine glass without leaving lipstick, how to say nothing with poise and make it feel like wisdom. And Daniel, my sweet, soft-spoken boy who used to play Monopoly with his cereal box money, he adored her. So I learned to adore her too. Back then, I lived a modest but full life. My mornings started at 6:30, always 6:30. I'd make tea with the same chipped kettle Arthur bought me on our 20th anniversary, then walk over to the library by 8. It was just part-time work, cataloging, helping seniors with the printer, story time for toddlers on Thursdays. But it grounded me, made me feel useful. Afternoons were for my bookkeeping clients. A few small businesses around town still trusted me with their numbers. I liked that. There was a calm in balancing spreadsheets, in making columns match, in creating order out of chaos. And when the sun went down, I'd light a candle. One of mine, lavender and sandalwood, or cinnamon vanilla if I was feeling sentimental. Then I'd sit on the porch and listen to the wind rustle the leaves, the same way Arthur used to do. Sometimes Daniel would call. Sometimes he'd forget, but I didn't mind. He was busy building. He was my only child. I wanted him to fly, even if it meant he flew so far I could barely see the outline of who he used to be. The first red flag came disguised as a compliment. It was Tiffany's second visit to our home. She wandered the hallway like it was a museum, paused at Daniel's high school graduation photo, wrinkled her nose at the crocheted couch cover my sister made. "You've done such a good job with this place," she said finally. "It's so quaint." She smiled as she said it. but her eyes didn't match. Later, after dinner, she asked if I'd ever considered selling. Daniel could help you find something more central, she offered. Something more efficient. I told her I liked my garden, my porch, my memories. She nodded. Of course, she said, lips tight. But it must be so much work for you, all that maintenance, all alone. She said it kindly, as if loneliness were something she pitied, as if staying in the home I built with my husband was a burden I hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. Daniel started visiting less after that. When I asked, he blamed the startup. Investors. Time zones. You know how it is, Mom. Tiffany still texted now and then. Always sweet, always surface. Hope you're staying warm. Daniel misses you. Brunch soon? But brunch never came. Not until the one that changed everything. When I finally confessed to Daniel, months later, that I'd taken a second job at a florist's just to keep up with repairs, he looked like someone had gut-punched him. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I smiled. You were busy. I didn't say the rest. That I hadn't wanted to look like a burden. That I'd spent years teaching him to be independent, only to realize I'd also taught him to believe I didn't need anyone. Especially not him. Still, even with the loneliness, I believed we were okay. I believed Tiffany cared. She sent me a birthday card every year. Expensive ones with embossed lettering. One year she even included a spa gift card. I found out later it had expired 6 months before she gave it to me. There was a moment, just one, that should have told me everything. I'd gone to visit their penthouse downtown. First time. Tiffany met me at the door, flawless as always. Her white blouse so crisp it looked starched by angels. She hugged me, air-kissed both cheeks, and said, "Lucille, finally." We sipped tea in a living room that looked like a magazine spread. Cold, curated, beautiful. Daniel was running late, so we talked. I told her about the library, about one of the kids who drew me a picture of a dragon and told me it was me, because dragons are strong. She smiled politely, then said, "You know, Daniel and I were talking. You don't have to work. He's doing really well now. We want to support you." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I know," I said, "but it keeps me moving, gives me purpose." She blinked. "Still, it's not ideal. For someone your age. You should be traveling, resting. You know Daniel offered to send you something monthly, right?" I paused. "He mentioned it once, a while ago." She set her teacup down. "It's already set up." That was the first time she said it, 3 months before that brunch. And still, I hadn't seen a penny. Looking back, the clues were everywhere. She controlled the money, the schedules, the access. Daniel was always the one running, distracted, 2 steps behind. Tiffany? She was always in control of the thermostat, the calendar, the guest list. Even when I'd call Daniel's number, she was the one who often picked up. "He's in a meeting," she'd say. "Anything urgent?" I started to feel like a nuisance, like an old file she kept trying to archive. But I told myself it was modern life. Busy people. Busy times. I told myself they loved me. I told myself if they didn't, why would she keep inviting me to brunches I never attended? Why would she call on Mother's Day? Why would she keep up the show? Because she needed the illusion. Because Daniel needed to believe she was the one holding his world together. And I was just a small part of it. There's one memory I can't shake. A moment that lives in me like a splinter. I was at the grocery store, buying milk and eggs with cash. Because my card had declined the week before, and I didn't want the embarrassment again. I ran into Tiffany. She was buying wine and charcuterie. "Oh, Lucille," she said, pulling off her sunglasses. "What a surprise." She didn't ask what I was doing, just looked down at my wire basket. Then she smiled, wide, pitying, and reached into her purse. She pulled out a crisp $50 bill and pressed it into my palm. "Just in case," she said with a wink. I tried to give it back. She insisted. When I got home, I tore it in half. because somehow that hurt worse than being forgotten. That was charity, performed kindness. And I knew then, she didn't see me as Daniel's mother. She saw me as a character in their brand story. The struggling mom of a self-made mogul, a photo op, an inconvenience to be managed. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't done writing my part. The truth came out 2 weeks after the brunch. I'd been pacing the living room, staring at my closed laptop, debating whether to call Daniel. My pride was the only thing keeping my finger off the button. That brunch haunted me. The number, $6,000, clanged in my head like a bell someone kept ringing. I needed to know the truth, not the polite truth, not the surface. So I emailed his assistant instead. Just one line. Can you confirm which account Daniel's monthly transfers are going to? It was a quiet rebellion, that email. A crack in the mask I'd worn for far too long. The reply came an hour later. Hi, Lucille, absolutely. Transfers were initiated last October to the Chase account ending in 0027. Happy to provide transaction history if needed. Let me know. The account I had closed 9 months ago. The one with overdraft notices and a balance that never made it past double digits. So where had the money gone? I sat there, staring at the screen, numb. Something broke open inside me. Because Daniel believed he was taking care of me. And Tiffany knew that account was closed. She had been sitting in my living room when I shredded the letter from Chase. She'd handed me the trash bin. She'd looked right at the routing number. She knew. And she let him believe she didn't. That was the moment everything shifted. The betrayal was no longer vague. It was sharp. Documented. Confirmed. My son had been sending me thousands every month, and someone else had intercepted it. I didn't call Daniel. I needed more. Needed to be sure before I shattered his world. So I printed the bank statements and circled the transactions. I pulled my own bank history. Dusty, barren. I highlighted everything. Laid them out across the dining table like evidence in a trial. I needed it to make sense. But it didn't. I called Chase. Told them I was the account holder. Gave the old numbers. Asked where the money had gone, and what they told me made my stomach drop. The account was reactivated. What? I breathed. That account was closed. Reactivated in November, she said. Online request. Authorized by a secondary user on file. Tiffany Allen. Tiffany. She had access. She'd reactivated the account. Quietly. Behind my back. She'd watched Daniel initiate the transfers. And she'd let the money fall neatly into an account she knew I never touched. And when I never thanked him? When I never called? She let him think I was ungrateful. She let me look like the one who turned away. The shame hit harder than the anger. I felt hollow. Like I'd been written out of my own life and didn't even notice. Everything Tiffany had done now clicked into place like a lock finally turning. The spa gift card that didn't work. The brunches that never happened. The clipped phone calls. The pitying glances. The way she offered me cash like I was a charity case. She had been managing me, curating me, controlling what Daniel saw, what he knew, what he gave. She'd made sure I appeared small, unworthy, forgettable. And it worked. I became what she framed me as. Even to myself. That night, I collapsed. I mean fully. The way grief folds a person down to the floor. I slid off the couch, onto the carpet, curled up by the cold legs of the coffee table and sobbed so hard my teeth ached. I cried for the money, sure, but mostly, I cried because I realized something deeper had been stolen. My role, my place in my son's life. All those years, scraping by, cutting coupons, ignoring my own health to pay his school fees, cheering from the sidelines at muddy soccer fields while other parents barely looked up from their phones. And now? Now I was just the woman who needed $6,000, who didn't even say thank you, who let it go unnoticed. She had rewritten me, and I had let her. I didn't sleep. I couldn't eat. For the next 3 days, I drifted through my home like a ghost. I sat at the library and couldn't remember how to check out a book. A toddler handed me a sticker, and I burst into tears. I kept asking myself the same impossible question. How do you tell your only son that the woman he loves doesn't love you? How do you say, she's been stealing from me? She's been stealing from you. How do you say, everything you thought you were doing for me never reached me? How do you say, she didn't just take my money, she took my voice? And still, part of me wanted to protect him. Isn't that twisted? Even as I broke down, I wanted to shield him from what it would do to him, to his marriage, to the illusion. There were moments I thought, maybe I should just disappear. Move to a smaller place, stop expecting anything. Maybe I deserved this. Maybe I should have spoken up sooner. Maybe I should have told him the truth about my struggles instead of wearing the mask of quiet strength. But then another voice rose up inside me. Old, tired, but fierce. No. You were lied to. You were erased. And for the first time, that voice didn't sound like a whisper. It sounded like a roar. On the 5th day, Daniel called. I don't know what's going on, he said, but I need to talk to you. I froze. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. I checked the account, he said. Mom, you never spent a cent. Not once. Not in months. I stayed silent. I asked Tiffany, he added. She said you probably just didn't want to accept help. I closed my eyes. The lie stung more when it came from her lips. Is that true? He asked, and I couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. No, Daniel, I whispered. That's not true. Silence. A thick, heavy silence. I think we need to talk in person, he said finally. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Come over tomorrow, I said. But after we hung up, I knew one thing with complete clarity. This wouldn't just be a conversation. This would be the confrontation that would rewrite everything. Daniel came over the next day. He brought croissants. Croissants. As if powdered sugar could soften the sound of the truth waiting in my throat. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table, peeling off layers of his blazer like he was bracing for a storm. I poured tea with trembling hands. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, like he'd been running marathons in his sleep. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly, finally. I wanted to scream. I tried. Instead, I said, because I didn't want to come between you and your wife. He winced like I'd struck him. Then I laid it out. Every transfer I never saw. Every month I waited and told myself maybe he forgot. Every moment Tiffany looked me in the eyes and pretended. He didn't interrupt. Didn't deny. He just sat there, mouth set, eyes rimmed red, as if part of him had already known. When I was done, he exhaled and said the one thing I wasn't ready for. Mom, I think I already knew something was wrong. But that didn't mean he acted. Not then. Not fully. He promised to look into it. Said he'd talk to Tiffany privately. He apologized, yes, over and over. But in that apology, there was a hesitation. A split. A boy still afraid of what it would cost to face the full truth. That was the beginning of my wilderness. Not the betrayal, but the waiting, the quiet, the space where healing should begin but never quite lands. I spent days expecting something. A confrontation, a divorce, a reparation, anything. Instead, silence. No word from Tiffany, no update from Daniel. A week passed. Then 2. I checked my bank account obsessively. Nothing. Eventually, Daniel sent a text. She's going through something. We're talking it through. That was it. She was going through something. Like I hadn't just walked barefoot across broken glass. I spiraled. That's the only word for it. I stopped showing up to the library, called in sick to bookkeeping clients. I stayed in bed for days, surrounded by unopened mail and half-drunk mugs of tea that had gone cold beside my pillow. Grief comes in strange forms. Sometimes it looks like forgetting how to do the simplest things, like brushing your hair or answering a friend's call. Sometimes it looks like reliving the same conversation in your head 500 different ways and still never finding peace. Sometimes it looks like applying for a job at the local diner because you need to feel something, anything. And sometimes it looks like standing in your own kitchen, holding a wine glass you never drink from, and smashing it against the wall just to hear something break that isn't you. I started therapy. That was Daniel's idea, oddly. He offered to pay for it. I refused. Then I found a local counselor who charged on a sliding scale. Her name was Ramona. She was in her 60s, wore flowing scarves, and had a gaze that could hold pain without flinching. "You're grieving a living loss," she said in our second session. I asked what that meant. She said, "It's the pain of losing something that still exists. A relationship that's alive on paper but dead in reality. A son who still breathes but no longer sees you." And that broke me all over again. But it also gave it shape. Grief, when named, loses a little of its power. I started writing letters. Not to send, just to speak. Letters to Arthur, to Daniel, to Tiffany. Letters to myself, back when I was 28 and hopeful. Letters to the version of me that thought silence was noble, that thought love was best expressed in sacrifice. I even wrote one to the house, thanked it for sheltering my secrets, my sorrow. Then I lit it on fire in the backyard, and for the first time in months, I felt the smallest spark of something I hadn't felt in ages. Power. Then came the false hope, a package at my doorstep, wrapped in gold tissue paper, a handwritten card on top, from Tiffany. The note was 2 lines long. "I'm sorry for how things were handled. Let's start over. Brunch? Tea." Inside the box, a designer scarf. I stared at it, held it in my hands like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. Was this remorse? Was this her way of reaching out? I told myself maybe it was. Maybe I misjudged her. Maybe she wasn't malicious, just overwhelmed. Maybe she finally saw me. Ramona warned me, "Be careful with hope. It's the sharpest blade." But I ignored her. I texted Tiffany, "Brunch sounds nice. I'm free Sunday." She replied with a heart emoji. I spent that Saturday picking out something elegant but neutral. I even practiced a smile in the mirror, just in case. Just in case the story was about to change. Sunday came. I arrived 5 minutes early, sat at the cafe table outside, ordered tea, waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. She never showed. I texted her, called. Nothing. I paid for my tea and left the scarf on the chair. Let someone else wear it. I walked home and sat on the porch for hours. No tears, just stillness. And then, laughter. Not loud, but deep. The kind that comes when you realize the joke was on you the entire time. That was the moment I knew. She was never sorry. She was just cleaning up her image. She didn't want peace. She wanted silence. That night, I wrote one last letter, to Daniel. But this one, I sent. "I love you. I always will. But I need to step back until you're ready to see what's real. Not what you've been told, when you're ready to come to me. Not through her. I'll be here. But I can't keep bleeding just to make it easier for both of you to look away. Love, Mom." I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't keep trying to mother someone who couldn't, or wouldn't, protect his own mother. And that was my sacrifice. Not the money, not even the relationship, but the dream. The dream that he'd choose me, that he'd wake up, that he'd see her clearly. I let it go, because sometimes healing isn't about fixing what broke. Sometimes it's about surviving it. 6 weeks passed. No calls from Daniel, no messages from Tiffany. And somehow, I didn't break. In fact, I began to rebuild. It started small. I cleaned out the attic, a task I'd avoided for years. There were boxes full of Arthur's old camera gear, stacks of Daniel's school art, a box labeled Mom's Dreams I didn't remember ever packing. Inside were journals, from my 20s, pages full of sketches, business ideas, recipes, budget plans for a tea shop I'd once dreamed of opening. I sat on the attic floor for hours, cross-legged like a girl, flipping through the past like it was a mirror. I had forgotten who I used to be before I became wife, mother, invisible. And suddenly I knew. I wanted her back. Not the whole version, but the part of me that used to believe she was capable of more than surviving. I opened an online shop. Tea blends, infused with herbs from my own backyard. Lavender and chamomile, ginger and cardamom. Lucille's leaves. I made the logo myself with a free Canva template and a deep breath. I thought no one would buy. But people did. Not thousands, but enough. Orders trickled in, then grew. Then one day, a local boutique messaged me on Instagram asking if they could stock 3 of my blends in store. I cried in the kitchen. Not because of the money, because it was mine. Because it came from my own hands. Because for the first time in years, I was building something that didn't require anyone else's permission. My therapist, Ramona, called it emotional sovereignty. She said it's what happens when we stop trying to win love that has conditions. You've stepped out of the hunger, she said. Now you're learning how to feed yourself. That hit me like a hymn. Because for so long, I'd been hungry, for approval, for inclusion, for scraps of kindness tossed my way like favors. Now I was learning to bake my own bread, literally and metaphorically. The glow-up didn't happen all at once, but it did happen. I updated my wardrobe, not for anyone else. Just because I'd spent too long wearing invisibility, I cut my hair shorter, added a streak of silver blue at the temple. Something about it made me walk straighter, chin higher. I even said yes to a dinner invitation from a neighbor, a sweet man named Gregory who'd lived 2 blocks over for 15 years. We'd known of each other, waved in passing, but now we talked. Really talked. Over lemon chicken and roasted vegetables, he told me about his late wife. I told him about Arthur, about Daniel. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix me. He just listened. And something about that felt holy. We didn't kiss, but his hand touched mine on the walk back to my door, and it lingered. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be the perfect version of myself. I was just being. And that was enough. Meanwhile, the silence from Daniel grew louder. I didn't check my phone obsessively anymore, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of him every day. Some nights I still pictured him as a boy, curled up on the couch, blanket over his knees, asking me questions about constellations. He used to say, "When I get rich, I'll buy you the stars, Mom." And now? Now he couldn't even call. But I didn't chase. That was the new me. No more running toward people who run away from me. Then came the hint, the whisper of a coming storm. It arrived in the form of a forwarded email from my old friend Maria, who worked as an events manager for the Chamber of Commerce. "Thought you'd want to see this," she wrote. Attached was a flyer. Annual Spring Brunch Fundraiser, hosted by Daniel Allen and Tiffany Allen. Location, the Botanical Pavilion, 10 a.m. Sunday. Underneath the logo, in delicate italic script, it read, "In honor of mothers and mentors who made us who we are." I stared at the screen, laughed out loud, then whispered, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." A few hours later, I got the formal invite in the mail, gold foil envelope, my name in calligraphy. "We would be honored by your presence." I turned it over 3 times like it might bite me, because for all the elegance, I knew exactly what this was. Damage control, image maintenance. They needed me at that table again, to smile, to blend in, to complete the picture. Daniel hadn't spoken to me in weeks, and yet here he was, inviting me to sit beside the woman who had siphoned off my son's love like it was her inheritance. I almost threw the invite in the trash. Almost, but something told me not to. Because this wasn't the same Lucille who'd cried on the carpet and waited for someone else to do the right thing. This Lucille? She didn't beg. She chose. And part of me wanted to choose presence, not for them, for me, to show up in my truth, to take up space without asking. So I bought a new dress. Deep navy, boat neckline, fitted at the waist with clean lines, simple, Elegant, unapologetic. I paired it with a pair of pearl earrings Arthur gave me on our 10th anniversary. Then I boxed up a gift. Not for Tiffany, not even for Daniel, but for the truth. Because if this brunch was their show, I was bringing the curtain. The venue shimmered. White roses twisted into trellises. Crystal vases lined every table. Waitstaff moved like shadows, refilling champagne and smiling with practiced ease. The air was thick with spring blossoms, social niceties, and subtle performance. I arrived exactly on time, not early, not late, wearing the navy dress, the pearls, and something heavier than jewelry, peace. Not the soft kind, the earned kind. Daniel stood near the fountain, laughing too loudly with a man in a salmon blazer. Tiffany hovered beside him, nodding, smiling, sipping her mimosa like it was a prop. They hadn't seen me yet. But others had. Heads turned. A few guests whispered. I didn't hide, didn't rush. I simply moved with purpose, like a woman who'd been invited and then decided she was the event. Tiffany's eyes landed on me first. She blinked. Her smile froze halfway through a sip. Daniel followed her gaze, and his laughter stopped mid-breath. He stepped forward. Mom. I held his gaze and nodded once. Daniel, I said, calm and direct. Tiffany straightened her posture. Lucille, she added, her voice low and sweet. You look stunning. I didn't answer, because I wasn't here to play polite. A hush spread as we took our seats at the long head table. Place cards waited. They'd seated me 2 chairs down beside a florist from a charity board. Calculated. Daniel leaned toward me. I didn't know if you'd come. I placed my clutch on the table. You invited me. He looked down. Shame flickered in his expression. Tiffany busied herself with her napkin. When the speeches began, I waited. Watched. Daniel spoke first. He thanked the sponsors, the guests, the florists, the press. Then he paused. And to the woman who made me, my mother, Lucille, thank you for your strength, your wisdom, and your endless support. This brunch is in your honor. A spotlight hit my end of the table. Polite applause. A few people turned to smile at me. I lifted my chin and did not clap. Later, as dessert was cleared and music softened into background ambiance, Tiffany approached me. Alone. She sat in the empty seat beside mine, folded her napkin once, then again. Thank you for coming, she said, her tone syrupy and hushed. It really means a lot to Daniel, to both of us. I didn't respond. She tried again. Look, I know things got twisted. We've all been under pressure. Sometimes wires get crossed. You can stop, I said. Her mouth shut mid-sentence. I turned my body slightly toward her, held her gaze. Let silence widen between us like a canyon. You didn't just take money, I said quietly. You took moments. You took the version of me Daniel thought about when he laid his head down at night. You replaced it with an image that served you. Her throat moved, like she was about to speak. I didn't let her. You let him believe I was silent because I didn't care. You let him think I was cold, ungrateful, distant. But I wasn't. I leaned in, just enough for her to feel it. I was drowning. Her eyes glistened. But I saw no remorse, only fear. Not of what she'd done, but of what I might now do. I smiled softly. It would have taken you nothing to be kind. And yet, you chose cruelty wrapped in charm. She opened her mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to spin. But I cut through it with one line. I'm not here for revenge, Tiffany. Pause. She blinked. I'm here to remind you what grace looks like. Her breath caught, and I watched it, the moment she saw herself reflected in me. Who she could have been, who she pretended to be, and who she'd never actually become. A woman who doesn't need to destroy others to feel powerful. She stood slowly, nodded once, then walked away without a word. Daniel approached later, not with bravado, but humility. He stood beside me as I gathered my things. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. I looked up at him. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "Just listen." He nodded. "I'm not angry," I added. "But I needed you to know the truth. Not just about what happened, but about me. I'm not fragile. I'm not bitter. I'm not asking for anything." He swallowed. "You're my mother," he said. And I forgot how to protect that. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't the time for repair. This was the time for reckoning. I left the venue quietly. No dramatic exits. No scenes. Just a woman stepping out into the sunlight, no longer carrying what never belonged to her. And for the first time, I didn't feel small in their world. I felt too whole to fit in it. It's quiet now. Not the kind of silence that hurts, but the kind that settles. Like warm water over old bruises. Like the hush of a house that finally stopped bracing for footsteps that never came. I wake up when the sun rises. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I boil water for tea. Not the cheap bags anymore. My own blends, small batches, labeled by hand. Each one with a note tucked inside. Steep for 5 minutes, breathe for longer. I sell out every month. I still don't make much. But it's mine. The old porch swing creaks when I sit on it. I like that. It reminds me that things don't have to be perfect to be cherished. I've repainted the house. Soft olive green with white trim. Gregory helped me with the heavy lifting. I fed him lemon cake and made him laugh until he nearly fell off the ladder. We haven't put a name on what we are. But his coat lives on the hook by the door. And when it rains, we sit side by side under the awning, hands lightly touching, saying nothing at all. Daniel calls once a week now, sometimes twice. He's slower when he speaks now, less performative, more present. He asks questions, real ones, like, "What are you reading this week?" Or, "Do you need help with shipping orders?" Or the one that landed heavy in the silence between us. "Would you ever want to have dinner? Just you and me?" We're not healed, but we're honest. And that's more than I ever expected. I haven't seen Tiffany since the brunch. She sent one letter, typed, precise, hollow. I never opened it. It sits in my drawer, unopened, right beside the letter I wrote to her and never sent. Mine was handwritten, messy, real. In it, I wrote, "I hope someday you learn the difference between being admired and being loved. Because love, real love, doesn't require a stage." But she never needed to read it. The words were for me. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a drawer full of letters you no longer need to send. Ramona and I still meet once a month. Not because I'm unraveling anymore, but because I like having someone who remembers where I started. We sit beneath the fig tree behind her office, sip chamomile, and talk about all the versions of ourselves we've outgrown. She once said, "Closure isn't a door that slams shut. It's a hallway you walk out of, slowly, quietly, with your own keys in your pocket." That stuck with me, because I'm finally walking out of that hallway, and I'm not looking back. Last week, I taught a workshop at the library, starting over after 60. 5 women showed up. One had just lost her husband. Another had just finalized a divorce after 34 years. They were fragile, but they showed up, and that alone made them powerful. I brought tea, of course, and candles I'd made. At the end of the session, one of the women touched my arm and said, "You don't look like someone who's been through hell." I smiled. "I don't carry it anymore," I said. That's the secret, really. You don't forget what happened. You don't erase it. But you stop carrying it like it's still yours. I still wear the navy dress sometimes. Not for events. For me, when I want to feel tall. When I want to remember that I don't need a title at someone else's table. I am the table. And on days when the past tries to pull me back, when I remember the silence, the erasure, the weight of being misunderstood, I light a candle and steep my tea. And I write. Not for vengeance. Not for anyone to read. Just to stay soft in a world that tried to harden me. Because I didn't come out of this bitter. I came out of it true, to myself, to my voice, to the woman I was before the world asked her to shrink. And now? Now I walk with all versions of me, the young mother, the grieving widow, the overlooked matron.